Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar organized by ECNAIS within the ELNE week with EFI. My name is Rodrigo Melo. I'm Vice President of EFI and Chairman of ECNAIS, and I also work at the Portuguese Association of Independent Schools. And today for this chat, we have with us Sofia Reis. Sofia Reis also works with me at the Portuguese Association of Independent Schools, but for a long time, she was Secretary General of ECNAIS and has been working in education, I would say, with independent schools for more than 25 years. Sofia has recently come from the United States, where she completed her PhD in educational leadership. And I will just give the word very quickly to Sofia before we begin our chat, so she can present just a brief outline of what you are studying, why you decided to study it, and then we'll go right into leadership in times of turbulence.
So thank you, Rodrigo, and thank you for being part of this webinar today. I attended a program at University of Montana called International Educational Leadership. And I would say that when you've been spending over 20, you said at that time was over 20 years in education, I felt the urge to learn more in kind of two different pathways. One was to be able to have more tools as an educational researcher, and that giving me the chance to be immersed in a different educational system was maybe one of the best assets that I got out of this experience. It was challenging, but at the same time, very, very interesting.
So thank you very much. And now for the next 40 minutes, half an hour to 40 minutes, let's dive into what it means to be a leader in turbulent times. Firstly, Sofia, tell us your story. So you did some case studies of leaders in Eastern Europe. What was the idea of studying leadership in turbulent times in Eastern Europe? Does this have something to do with the fall of the Berlin Wall?
Of course. So actually, as you were saying, I was for a number of years very active in ECNAIS. But the first time I attended an ECNAIS conference was back in 1998. And it was in Warsaw, in Poland. And I was absolutely stunned by these very recent schools that had been created. And I visited, as usually you do in ECNAIS, you do visit schools. And I was very interested. So there's that was that idea that there was some strength and some new schools that had just emerged after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then big gaps in time about my own personal story. First, I was in elementary first year of school when there was a revolution in Portugal, so in 1974. And while I was working on my PhD, we had COVID. And so, in a way, my educational life was really bounded by these two massive disruptions. First year of elementary school and through my PhD. And so I was always really, really interested in this idea that why are people so able to endure all efforts and to continue educational schooling of high quality throughout very turbulent environmental circumstances? Did I answer your question?
Yes. So you went to see in schools that were founded after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and so people who leaded their schools through those turbulent times, and then again that leaded their schools through the pandemic, and so again very, very turbulent times. And what did you find out about these leaders?
I found out multiple things. I just would like to reinforce that in a way my research was based on the idea that if schools fail, we as a society do fail as well, because we are not able to educate in the sense that we are not able to pass the cognitive skills and how to develop capacity of learning to our youngsters. And so it was very much this idea that maybe with lots of changes, it's possible to continue and to educate future generations. What I found about these leaders, first of all, it was very interesting because so I did a type of study that is well, I'm not going into the methodological part, but they were not really case studies. I did a set of interviews, and these interviews, so it's called a phenomenology. The idea is that you have stories from multiple persons, and then you collect all these stories and you identify the common elements of all stories. So actually, I interviewed people from 8 different countries, from Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. Overall, I talked to 15 different persons, and they had lots of elements in common in spite of their own countries and the evolution of their education systems being very different. So I would first say that what they had in common was something that I called uh, assertiveness, in the sense that they were able to propel an individual willingness into a collective effort. So all of them had this idea that they wanted to create a new school, but this is an individual thing, and schools are not individual organizations. So they were able to transform that impetus, this individual idea, into a collective effort, engaging teachers to work at the school, parents to enroll children in their schools. So and also convince the administration about their capacity to build on a school.
So building on the traditional leadership literature, that would be something like to have a vision and to really share the vision within the group of people who is in the organization. Is this so?
Not, I would say it's far more expensive and extensive than that, because you have to be willing to transform. It's more transformative, and you have to be able to create a collective of people that will help you to go through that effort. So it's not only the vision and the ability within the organization, but also to build on the external conditions that surround your organization.
Okay, so that's also again goes into, so is it a community effort, or is it the capacity to read the contexts where the organization is working?
Both. So these leaders were all extremely good communicators, in the sense that they were able to transform what the in a very succinct and easy, with their vision, you're able to transform the chaotic inputs from outside the school into clear messages from out to within and within out of the school. So they were able to have a clear sense of what to do with from what was going on outside into the school. And I'll give you an example. For instance, one of the schools, when the pandemic started, they had so everybody was working on Zoom, and they realized that while teachers were fearful, that fear would be transmitted to their children. And educators, if educators are fearful, that is something that will build on the organization. So what they did was to have, the first effort was kind of a collective effort within the teachers to understand and to be able to deconstruct their own fear, so they will not be passing on that fear to the students and to the parents. And so it's just this idea that they have this a very clear view of what, from the outside chaotic situations, how to transform that within. And the same thing outside. I'm thinking about a school. When they started, it was a teacher that started the school in her own house. And so I always was puzzled, how could you convince parents and other teachers to come to join you if you started the school at home? Her school continues being called uh, like home school. And she said, oh, I put advertisements in the newspapers to get teachers, and I interviewed all them, and I identified which were the features of these teachers that I wanted and how they connected with my idea of schooling. So you see, it's this idea of transforming and being able to create a community on very clear, structured ways of communicating.
So, and also a very strong narrative or pedagogical narrative. Why did I put up the school? What are we going to do together?
So let me give you some kind of background. So all these schools, the people I interview were the creators and the generators of schools that did that between 89 and early 2000s. I have one exception of that, but it's not so. But the idea, they have a very clear idea of their pedagogical mandate. So they knew what they wanted to do, and they come all by a point that in American English you'd say frustration, which means that they were disappointed with what education systems in their countries were able to provide, and all of them wanted to reinforce a children-centered pedagogical school. So, and that's what they created. So there was a very convoluted political time, because lots of changes were occurring at the political level, at the economic level, at the social level, and they found an opportunity in that changing environment, which is obviously very unstable, to give that step and to start. They were not all teachers, so I interviewed teachers and parents, because some of those schools were generated by parents who were very disappointed with the schools existing to raise their children.
And what were the bigger obstacles or the bigger difficulties these leaders had to endure in those turbulent times? Was there some common difficulty for all of them?
Oh, yes. So first, I would say from the beginning, and there's I'd like you mentioned earlier narratives, and I really would like to talk about that, because the narrative that I remember, so the first time I attended ECNICE back in 89, sorry, in 98, the narrative that these leaders had was that they were creating these schools for democracy. So there was clear for them that at that time they were creating alternative schools to the very centralized and hierarchical, well, it was kind of commanded education system in all these countries. There's variations because, well, in 8 countries, of course, the education systems were not all similar. But there's this idea that they wanted to do something different, and the idea to create more democratic education systems entailed the possibility of creating schools with different philosophical, religious, or just pedagogical backgrounds. So that is the statement where we are. What obstacles they had? First of all, to find a place, a house. So all these leaders mentioned the difficulty that was finding the space to create a school. And we have to go back in time and think there was no private property then. So having enough space for a school was extremely difficult, and some of those schools were created in very small spaces. Then they had the difficulty, I would say that was the most important thing, to find ways within the administration, because all these schools have to have the support of and the authorization to function by the ministries of education or whatever educational authority that is. And so there was not a clear set of rules how to establish a school as they may have now 35 years later. But so it was very difficult to find what to do, and all of these schools endured very difficult relationship with the educational administration and with the inspections of their own countries.
I'm hearing something that we still have today still. But, and now going back to the turbulent, would you say that these leaders of the schools during these turbulent times are heroes, or they are just people doing the best they can in the circumstance?
Oh, for me, they are absolute heroes. And there's something that, in a way, also comes from some of your previous questions. I asked them what made their schools good schools. And and it was very funny because it really went along with my own notion of leadership. Their first statement was teachers' team, the quality of our teachers. So it's the idea that leadership and school quality, it's not an individual feature, it's a collective feature. It's a group of people that are able to work well together, and they together build school. So not only they individually are heroes, but they have this capacity to create a team and make and share the vision collectively. So it's always this idea of turning something that is individual into a collective effort and have all the team moving to that direction.
So the schools you went to and the leaders you studied, we are speaking of Eastern European schools, right? So Poland, Czech Republic,
Lithuania,
Lithuania,
Slovenia,
Slovenia,
Croatia,
Croatia.
Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania.
Okay.
And so all these are countries that used to be from the Iron Curtain and now are members of the European Union. That was my baseline to find and to choose those countries.
What was the motivation for these people in these countries after? So the Berlin Wall falls, you know, democracy comes to these countries, and people start creating schools. Is this an entrepreneur thing, a philosophical thing, you know, something just on the top of the head for freedom? What was the motivation behind?
It's very much to be able to create something that they thought was much more adequate to educate their own children. So it's this idea of projecting for the future, and that the existing education available at that time was not the best possible education for the children, and they wanted to educate them better. And I would say there's no entrepreneurial, and whenever these discussions on the privatization of education, all these leaders wanted to make money. If you want to make money, you don't start a school. That's not the way to make money. So all these people are much more bound to their own school ethos through their philosophy and religious background, much more than the idea of making a business for profit.
And any curious, you know, I bet you have a lot of nice stories, you know, small anecdotes almost. Do you want to share one or two with us? Something that really strange or awkward or heroic or that these leaders had to do?
Oh, there's plenty of stories. And I'm just thinking one of all these individual stories, and especially also, so the countries that used to be part of Yugoslavia, so Slovenia and Croatia, they endured a war. So there's also this, it's just kind of completing and just getting on that pathway from your story. It's just that they thought that creating schools after the war was an effort to establish peace. So there's not only the democracy, but like a peace effort, and to create more tightness within society in the efforts after war. And I'm talking about Croatia. I'm thinking about the person I interviewed in Croatia. So it's a story that you will recognize, and many schools will recognize. So she worked with inspection for almost 1 year to have all the building in the right conditions to be approved and to be able to start the school. And so she had to ask for this request in summer. And obviously, for that in summer, she thought she could open the doors beginning of the school year, so to start the school. So she did, and the authorization, the legal authorization from the inspection was never coming. Finally, she had a group of inspectors that came and didn't give her the authorization to start to school because the quality of the air inside the classroom was not adequate for the children. So you see, if you don't, there's all sorts of blocks and blockage and obstacles that they had to overcome. But the quality of the air, which of course was to do with ventilation, and they wanted to have extra ventilation, but there was windows, and the room was set and was rebuilt within what they had told us before, the windows and the spaces and the light and all that. And suddenly we could not open because the quality of the air inside the classroom was not good enough.
And Sophia, do you think, so again, coming back to leadership in turbulent times, is there a place, or did it come as important for you in your study? And now I have asked Valentina to let everybody in. Since we're not a very big number, we can see our faces. So if you want, turn on your cameras. If you don't. But I think this could be interesting. And at 9:30, we'll have some space for Q&A. But what's the place in all this for middle management? So these people have number two that is their right arm, or is it more them and the group? How does this work?
That varied enormously, and it's been shifting throughout the time. So as I told you, in a way, kind of my take, and I think if you'd ask me what surprised me more was the evolution and how these schools were able to mature as organizations. So they went from the point where they had this idea: we want to educate children better, and we want to build schools for democracy. And what I really observed, especially after COVID, was that this idea, there's an enormous shift between just being able to do something different and children-centered. So the narrative of democracy shifted into emotional care and spiritual development, that was what I was most surprised about. How was that evolution? And when you tell me about middle management, a school that suddenly is organized into the well-being of all persons within the school has a totally different structure from when they began 35 years ago, where they mostly were offering, so they had to fulfill the national curriculum, and this identity of children-centeredness was made throughout external activities and off-time activities. So they had to fulfill the national curriculum, and then they would offer like English with native speaking teachers, dance by dancers, music by musicians, and that was like the curriculum 35 years ago, and it evolved in a completely disrupted curriculum after COVID that in many cases is absolutely different from the national curriculum. So these schools are now innovators in their own countries and national education systems.
Okay, so, and with this, Sophia, let's open up the room. I know at least Sara wanted to jump in. I also think Luis wants to jump in, but he's having some trouble with sound. Sara, please tell us very quickly who you are and one question.
Okay, unfortunately, I hope you can hear me. Yes?
Yes, very well,
Okay.
very well.
My video doesn't want to start,
Okay.
so I guess I'm
Okay.
not entitled. But at least you can hear me. My name is Sarah Fichtner. I'm from the FIPS Research Institute in Germany, and I conduct a big school leadership study. I was presenting it last year at the ELNE month, actually. This year I'm too busy because we have the press conference for the new one on Thursday. So and the title of this study this year, this is why I was excited to actually join your conference. The title is Between Vision and Rebellion. So my question is, if what you're saying is not more common, and if the turbulent times, first question, aren't like everywhere now, if you look at the geopolitical arena, we live in very turbulent times, and yes, sure, there is differences in between the countries, but our representative study in public schools, public and private schools in Germany, found out that 60% of school leaders in Germany break the rules, the official rules of the school administration to be able to do good school development. And that is something. And then I think 69% say they're visionaries. They're visionaries, and this is in the public system. So there is a set of questions actually. Isn't it more common than we think that school leaders are actually, they're not only visionaries, but they're some sort of rebels already, perhaps? And second question, because you're talking about a set of quite special schools, but you already said in your last comment, maybe they become contagious. In which regards do they actually become contagious for the public system? So do you know what I mean? I stop there. Thank you.
Let's give here the floor to Luis, and then I'm just looking at the time, and then Sophia, you can get back on the Sara's two questions, and Luis, welcome.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sarah, for your, and I'm looking forward to read your study. So as I could understand, you are doing a quantitative study, and my study was a qualitative study, so I did a phenomenology, and about the idea of turbulence all around us. Totally agree. I have few pages in my dissertation about this, our perception of time and turbulence, and how we incorporate that in our own narratives, and how times are almost always turbulent, and how we find mechanisms to normalize turbulence. So yeah, I thought about a lot about that, and I totally agree with you. There's no calm, quiet times. That is an illusion. And things tend to be more complex because schools have, in my understanding, schools have enlarged their social mandate. We expect more from schools now than we did 10 years ago, than we did 20 years ago, than we did 30 years ago. It's interesting that you said that these leaders that you've worked with found themselves that they were school rebels. I would say that rebellion is part of all the schools that I worked with or I interviewed. There was always the idea to do better than others in different ways, using resources and reshaping the vision of education. And that leads me to the contagious part. Yes, I believe that it's crucial, and it is an understanding that was in on the basis, the political basis of the creation of these schools was not only diversity of projects and the idea that differences will enhance and strengthen democracy, but also a very clear understanding that systems and all the systems in Eastern Europe were mainly, so before 89, were mainly highly centralized and very uniform. The curriculum was uniform, and they were just the mass production of human resources for the centralized economy. And when everything is just changing and breaking apart, then you have to do differences for the sake of the education system to survive. You have to have different types of schools. So difference is part of the survival of the education system. With a plus, that is, private and independent schools were always able to innovate and to experiment in small scale. And that has a recognition, because we have to think that education systems shouldn't have to be allowed to start in point one and finish at the end of the system. And if the parents move, they have to continue their education. So there's a certain stability, what we call porosity in the education system, that allows children to complete pathways, if not always at the same school. And that makes a certain visibility of different projects. And they are, in all the countries that I studied, they are initiatives that were taken from private schools because they are small-scale experiments into the national wider schools. I hope I did answer your question.
Let's see, now we have Luis again. Luis, okay, just Luis, jump in if you're able to put your sound on. And just building on a question that Sara put, and also your answer about the fact that what may happen in one sector may go into the other sector and so on. Of course, it really depends on the country, but still, in most countries, the public sector only goes big scale. So either it's centrally organized by the state, or it's a region or something, but so you always need some kind of national policy. And so in that sense, because each independent school is a standalone, it's easier to experiment, because if things go well, they go well, it's okay. If things don't go well, it's just one school. And so in a way, even just sharing in some curious stories in Portugal, that 25, 30 years ago, maybe, we had a lot of issues with the National Inspectorate, because private schools were offering English lessons in primary school, and that was not in the national curriculum. And so there was a big fight with the inspectorate of what they were doing. And nowadays, well, teaching English from a young age is within the national curriculum. So that, Luis, I now and again see you. No? Okay. Sophia, we have the 2 final minutes. If based on what you learned, you had to give advice to a young entrepreneur, a lady or a young man who are now going into creating a school, what would you say?
First is assertion that leadership is not an individual characteristic. And so that if you want to build a strong educational project, do it with a team. That's what I heard time and time again. We are a team. The best of my school is our teachers. What makes your school successful? Us working together.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophia. And let me just, to end this seminar, cite one of the people I think you studied in his school, a young man from the Czech Republic, who, when asked, why did you create a school? Why did you put everything you had? You were a young man, why going into education? He said, well, I lived in the Soviet era. I grew up in the Soviet era, and I wanted to make sure I teach the future generations not to let others bully them around. And I have been remembering very much this phrase for the last days. And so creating schools, leading schools, is also about not letting bullies go around free in our world. thank you very much for everybody. I hope you had fun. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Effie, and